Well, welcome in. It's day 21 of the RIT race. Good of you to be here. We are into launching, I guess, what is officially now the fourth week of this federal election campaign. There's only this week and next before we go to the polls. And we have been, over the course of the campaign, sort of tracking the messaging and the communications from the various campaigns, the parties themselves. And by all accounts, rough first week for the Liberals, so here we are making the turn into debate week. So we thought we should touch base again with our friend Bob Pickard. He is the principal of Signal Leadership Communications, and just to see where they are as they head into this, what will be, I think, an important week for all parties concerned. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
Good morning, Dave. I'm well, and yourself?
I'm okay. Just curious to see if you and I have talked over the last few weeks about this, and we were going to be watching for any kind of nuance change, some major changes or shift in focus in terms of the messaging from the parties. What are you seeing?
The last time you and I spoke a week ago, we were predicting that the Liberals would go on the attack and run negative advertising. I was speculating about that, and that's exactly what's on offer now. And so it's both barrels blazing, and they're going to be looking for ways to distract people from the O'Toole momentum, which has commanded the attention in the early days of the campaign. Mr. O'Toole, as we've seen, is particularly vulnerable on the issue of gun control, and the Liberals are really hammering that one home right now. Just as trust was growing in Mr. O'Toole, just as Canadians were getting to know this man, they're now wondering, courtesy of the Liberals' efforts, is he really what he appears to be, or is he all over the map and will say anything to get elected?
Yeah, and that's an important factor because you start to see that sort of pop up in the polls, that whole question. I think you might have brought it up in week one where, that's how people were responding to some of this. He will say anything to get elected, and right. That has shifted over the course. Did you get any sense post-debate that any of that messaging changed?
I think that the gloves are off is how the messaging has changed. And I think it's just more targeted on potential issues. For the Tories right now, they're hammering the idea that he's a military man with a mission plan, the Secure the Future Conservative Party platform. And so they're trying to keep everyone paying attention to that set of policies which they would implement if elected. Mr. O'Toole, he's coming across as likable. He smiles a lot, almost too much, some people are saying. But you have to ask yourself, has he said a single charismatic or interesting thing that anybody remembers even a day later? So, here's a guy who's striking all of these balances to keep his right wing in saddle while addressing a broader centrist, moderate Canadian constituency. And I think, Dave, it's a miracle that some of the more extreme elements on the far right wing fringe of the party haven't done something really stupid yet to take him off his game.
Well, I mean, we can rely on the People's Party of Canada to sort of take up some of that oxygen, though, can't we?
I think they are the sleeper story in the campaign right now. Bernier is campaigning very well. He is creeping up in the polls. He began at 2 or 3%, maybe 4. Now he's at 5 or 6, maybe 7% in the polls. And those are votes which might otherwise go to the Tories. So Tories right now averaging 34% in the polls. If Bernier continues to grow, that's a real challenge to O'Toole. So, you have to feel almost sympathetic for his balancing act, like on the gun issue, for example. He has to throw the red meat to the Tory base and saying that he's not going to be as strict on guns as Trudeau, but at the same time, he can't scare urban Canadians or suburban Canadians that, he's going to be just like Andrew Scheer.
Yeah, we were making the point earlier in the show about that very issue, and let's face it, it's not an issue that necessarily resonates with a majority of Canadians by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But does it not surprise you, Bob, that the Conservatives didn't have an answer for that obvious question, and let's just put it to rest? The same thing, the way he came out right away and said I'm pro-choice. He did that in like the second day of the campaign. Let's get that behind us. They didn't seem to be ready for it, so I don't know what they were paying attention to. That's a communication fail to me.
I think they were a little flat-footed on that one. Clearly, that was always going to be an issue the Liberals would home in on in targeting Mr. O'Toole. And now that things are really competitive with the dead heat in the polls, you could expect that they're going to keep pounding away on this one issue. You know, with Mr. Trudeau this past week, we have seen kind of a comeback in a way. He's not reeling. They have not continued to drop in the polls. If anything, they've firmed up their position. There's no collapse going on here. And so I think that this next week with the debates coming is going to be the most interesting one of all.
Yeah, well, and you know, so many are saying this really is about communicating brand more than policy. So, you know, when you look at that, to some degree, the Jagmeet Singh brand is under pressure. I mean, we're hearing a lot about, okay, this is great that you're on TikTok, but seriously, where are you? Where's your ground game? Right? He's
desperate for attention. Mr. Singh has his 20%. It really hasn't fluctuated that much. He's about a dozen points behind the front runners. Everyone knows he's not going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And he keeps on trying to get noticed as a serious alternative to be Prime Minister. You know, yesterday there was the letter that he got the other party leaders to agree to where they're going to record that pro-vaccination message around the debates. That's just one sign of how they are so determined to get attention, which they've just not been getting. He's not saying anything new. He's saying spend more, create these new programs, but that's getting kind of stale now.
Yeah, well, and I guess the time is running out. So I got about a minute here. If you were advising him, what would you tell him to do in these final 2 weeks to, you know, kind of break through that bubble?
Well, I would certainly tell him to be who he is, to be authentically himself in coming out and describing what he would do if he were to earn the confidence of Canadians as the next Prime Minister of Canada. I would also give Mr. Trudeau some advice to take the gloves off and to, you know, throw away the script which is always too obvious or too rehearsed. It's okay to make mistakes. You don't have to come across perfect every time. In fact, a little imperfection might even help the guy.
Well, we'll wait to see. Some of that might come out in the debates. Bob, it's always good to have your insights on the communications out on the campaign. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Dave. Have a good one.
The latest numbers from Nik Nanos and his team indicate that the Conservatives have a slight lead right now in voter intention. That's within the margin of error, but still, it's a significant view to take in terms of the trend itself. Nick joining us this morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Just from your perspective, you know, you've been doing this for a little while now, watching how these things unfold. In your recollection, do you ever remember seeing an incumbent party call the election and then almost immediately see their numbers just drop as significantly as we have seen the Liberals?
Yeah, it doesn't usually happen that dramatically. You know, the fact of the matter is that when we were looking at the numbers in July, the Liberals were clearly in majority territory. They had a double-digit lead. In our seat projections, they had a lock on 170 seats, not counting the ones that were too close to call. And they were definitely in the driver's seat. And, you know, the thing is, Dave, is that even in just the days just before the election was called, the Liberals had a 5-point advantage. But, you know, what we've seen is an election that has become an absolute horse race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And last Thursday night, the Conservatives were up a full 5 percentage points ahead of the Liberals. Now it's tightened up a bit. But, you know, the thing is that for the Liberals, they had a massive advantage. No more. And they're in a fight to hold on to the government, and the Conservatives are in the game as potential contenders.
Is it your sense that the party was sort of running on half fumes just going into this? Because, you know, again, the analogy being the bus going in reverse, it's almost as if they're running out of gas here, and it's not the right time to be doing it come the end. Because it's not like the Tories have had this major breakthrough in numbers. The Liberals have come back to the pack.
Absolutely. You know, the thing is, it's kind of like the stock market. You know, I think the Liberal stock was overpriced in July. Now we had the technical correction. But, you know, for the Liberals, I think their assumptions probably when they were thinking about calling the election was there will be a little bit of a pandemic halo, that they'll be rewarded by Canadians for, managing through the pandemic and putting the stimulus out the door, and there'll be vaccination halo, and it'll be before there's any big economic disruption once the stimulus runs out. But, all those assumptions that the Liberals had that probably favored them are out the door, because the fact of the matter is, in our polling, people want to hear about the future. They don't want to hear about the past. And, the whole idea of the Liberals doing a victory lap is just not a good strategy. Plus, those blockbuster GDP numbers that showed that the economy shrank, not good for any incumbent government. And that was the last thing that any incumbent government want to happen during a campaign. Can you imagine, Dave, if the Canadian economy, instead of shrinking, they announced that it was expanding, then the Liberals would just be claiming credit for all the great policies from their perspective that they had. But not the case right now. So those assumptions are basically out the window.
Having said all of that, and you will know better than anybody, we have seen a significant shift in numbers over the last 2 weeks. Here we head into the final 2 weeks. So there's nothing to say that we're not going to see the same level of volatility before Election Day.
Absolutely. And, the Quebec is a case in point. We do nightly tracking right across the country for CTV and the Globe and Mail. And going into the debate, it was a race between the Liberals and the Bloc, and the Conservatives were up the upswing. Coming out of that debate, wow, what a significant change. We see the Liberals going up and the Bloc and the Conservatives going down. And what was one of the big issues? Guns, gun control, banning of assault weapons. And it looks like that particular issue has definitely hurt Aaron O'Toole, at least in the province of Quebec. And what was a bit of a pickup for him is now being dialed back to normal levels.
Interesting that you should say that, because, I think generally speaking, and I suspect your polling would bear this out, that, gun control really isn't top of mind in terms of a priority issue for Canadians. But it seems to be this wedge that the Liberals have learned how to use effectively and strategically during a campaign. And I was saying to Bob earlier, the Conservatives didn't see it coming, so I'm not quite sure how they fumble over that strategy universally.
Exactly. How could the Conservatives not see it coming? Because here's what we can, next campaign that we have a chat about, we'll be saying the same thing. The Liberals will bring out abortion. They will talk about privatized healthcare, and they'll talk about gun control and gun violence. They do that every single election that I've done polling in, without exception. Sometimes the Conservative leader falls for it. Sometimes they don't. In this particular case, Aaron O'Toole, being pro-choice, kind of knocked abortion off the table. Aaron O'Toole's plan on mental health care and renewing that kind of knocked the health care argument that the Liberals wanted to put off the table. But, the thing is, you can't be going into Quebec and Montreal where you had that tragic shooting at the Polytechnic. You can't have that and then talk about, not being cracking down on guns and having gun control. Just in Quebec, that just can't work. And I think that's why we've seen the numbers close. But for the Liberals, whatever they picked up in Quebec in the last couple of days, we haven't seen that same trend across the country. So it's a very regional shift that we've seen, at least in the nightly tracking.
Nik, it's great of you to join us, and thanks to you and your team for keeping us plugged in here on a daily basis. It's a fascinating and important part of the discussion that we're having during the campaign. Good of you to join us. Thanks.
Yep, great to talk. Bye-bye.
Nik Nanos, Nanos on the numbers. And that will wrap things up for this Sunday edition of the Writ Race. We are going to take the day off on Labor Day, but we'll be back at it Tuesday of this coming week. And, of course, it's debate week, and so we'll be watching that closely, and we'll be setting you up on Tuesday for what's coming on Wednesday and Thursday of this coming week. If you like what you hear, subscribe. Feel free to share it. Leave us a comment and a rating. We like the feedback, however it comes. So, good of you to join us and spend some time with us on this Sunday and the Writ Race. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is an Eye Contact podcast.